Here to discuss one of the proposals to keep the Vikings in the state, we have Senator Tom Bakk. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you.
On April 8th, you were quoted in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune saying on this issue, stating most of the pieces of the proposal were pretty much drafted, your proposal. So what can you tell us about it and the language right now?
Well, what didn't end up in the newspaper relative to that phone interview that I had with the Star-Tribune was there was some comments they took out of context. What I meant when I said most of the pieces are drafted is a stadium bill is a stadium bill is a stadium bill. And the most recently passed Twins legislation in 2008, you can go back and look at that legislation, and it was fleshed out over a number of years, and most of the pieces that fit into the Twins stadium will fit into a Viking stadium bill. Things like clawback provisions. I mean, if the value of the team is enhanced and then the owner sells the team, the state would share in some of the new enhanced value of the team. Things like that were in the Twin Stadium bill. So a lot of the language that would be in a Viking Stadium bill have already been pretty well vetted by the time they ended up in a final bill relative to the Twin Stadium. So we have not, House or Senate, have not actually worked on drafting any specific language relative to a Viking Stadium bill, but the work has really been done because it was done back in 2006 when the final Twins bill passed.
So what are some of the specific ideas that you can share at this point? How much revenue would you want to raise, and how would you generate that revenue?
Well, there are a lot of discussions going on, but there's a bipartisan group of legislators, both House and Senate, in a bipartisan way. In fact, another senator came to me yesterday and said, you know, Tom, I'm a season ticket holder and I want to be part of this discussion on the Vikings. So there's a surprising amount of interest on the part of in the state Senate, and I believe in the House.
Have you found a bottom line yet on what the Vikings would be willing to accept as far as public funding?
Well, we have a pretty good idea that an open-air stadium would cost us about $28 million a year in debt service, to service the debt on that. If you put a roof on it, and I'm somebody who believes it needs to have a roof, if it's going to be really a multifunctional facility and we're going to use it for more than 10 football games a year, we really need to have a roof on it. The state has an interest in having a roof on it. So if you're going to put a roof on it, that debt service number goes to about $40 million a year. You know, the Vikings make an argument that, you know, if we leave the state, you know, we're no longer going to pay income taxes on all of the Viking staff and on all of our players and all the people that work around the whole Vikings issue. We're no longer going to collect sales tax, you know, those 10 game days of the year and all the other purchases that we make. And kind of the but-for argument. But for us, the state wouldn't collect this, you know, what's some significant money, you know, somewhere between $20 and $30 million a year. The Vikings actually write a check out to the state of Minnesota in income taxes that they collect and in sales tax they collect. We call that the but-for test, but for them. But the truth is, you know, almost any business in the state can make that argument. You know, if we decided to move across the border to Hudson, Wisconsin, or to Rapid City, then we wouldn't be paying all these Minnesota taxes. But it's not something you can ignore. I mean, the truth is, these franchises move around, and the Vikings haven't in any way used it as a threat. And I got to give this owner credit. I mean, Mr. Wolf has never one time in all the conversations I've had with him ever said that he was going to move this team, and I don't believe that he will. But I also believe, and he also has said, that he is not going to renew his lease at the Metrodome. So his last season will be the season of 2011. So exactly what happens after that, I think, you know, may be dependent on maybe, you know, who a new owner is, or if some other proposal develops. But we've spent a lot of time, this bipartisan group of legislators, not only with the Vikings. In fact, we've spent less time with them, I think, than we've spent with people like people with the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce, with some very large Minnesota CEOs, members of the Minnesota Business Partnership, the largest businesses. We've spent a significant amount of time with the business the business owners in downtown Minneapolis who really have a lot of stake in having the Vikings downtown.
Well, and I want to inject here real quickly, because off camera you were saying everybody seems to have an opinion as you do travel and talk to people about this issue. So does that opinion sway pro or con as far as public funding for a stadium?
Well, I think what's kind of interesting about the Vikings issue is, and I traveled the state as much as any legislator in the last year as I traveled around the state when I was pursuing the DFL endorsement for governor. Had meet and greets all over the state, hundreds and hundreds of them, functions. And almost every place you went, when you took questions, somebody would raise the stadium issue and say, you know, what's going to happen with the Vikings? And so there are very few issues, I think, in all corners of the state. People have an opinion on the Vikings or on a stadium. I think generally, if you believe the polls, people are against public financing, but there is still a lot of support for the team.
Right.
I think it depends on how you ask the question. I mean, if you ask the question, would you support some kind of public financing if it was a certainty the Vikings were going to leave the state after the 2011 season? I think maybe you'd get a little different answer to some of the polls. So it really depends on how you ask it.
So let me pose my last question to you before we run out of time here. What do you think is a fair way to tax? Is there a fair way to tax to keep that to build a stadium and keep the team here?
Well, what we've tried to talk about as legislators, and that's why we haven't put a bill out yet, because when we actually get it, we're trying to kind of vet a proposal to get it as close as we can where all of the players, the Vikings, the whole city, the business community, members of the legislature in a bipartisan way, when something actually comes out on the table, people will have some kind of a general agreement, kind of a starting place where there's not real stark differences in what people's opinions are.
And you're not ready to share that yet?
And we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
But I do think there's kind of a universal feeling on the part of all of us that are working on it. And it is those that benefit from having the Vikings in Minnesota should pay for the stadium. And I think that is how we haven't quite figured out what that looks like yet. But I think the public can be pretty assured that if you benefit from having the Vikings in Minnesota, you're probably going to ask to participate in helping pay for a stadium.
Okay, and we'll watch this legislation as it appears in committee. So thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.